very much that, people...
But hold it, Robert, because there's a whole other angle here that really does get to the heart of what your book is about, and that's why skeptics believe what they do. And I think we have to be very careful when we use the term skeptic, because as you alluded to earlier, in that they're kind of the advanced guard to society and the fabric of society that holds it together. I mean, that's way a stretch for me, but that's where we were going before. They are also the advanced guard, the bulldog on a chain for science in general. So when I talk about skeptics, I'm not talking about some group of weird guys who meet once a year in London and in Las Vegas. I think far from that. I think they are really front and center for mainstream science. They're the guys who are out there espousing these ideas so other people can take cover and say, I don't really have to deal with that stuff. And in that way, I think looking at James Randi and looking at the phenomenon of James Randi is central to what you're talking about. So I do want to go there.
Yeah, I agree. And of course, I wouldn't want to give the impression I haven't written anything about James Randi. In fact, he features quite a lot in the book. Of course he does. He's one of the main guys. But what I'm trying to do is put it in a larger context, because if you're going to understand James Randi, you've got to understand the issues, and it was really the issues that my book is about.
Right. Well, here's what you wrote to me in the email. My view of Randi is that he's a conjurer doing whatever it takes to create illusions and opportunistically manipulating circumstances to his end. No question he makes stuff up. Now, that's what you said, and that is the truth. I mean, that's what the record says to anyone who looks at it.
I'm fascinated by James Randi. It has to be said, I am. He's a phenomenon in all sorts of ways. But I think one of the things especially that I puzzled about for a long time is what it is that makes magicians in particular so extremely obsessed about paranormal claims. And when I thought about this, I sort of pushed it a bit and came up with some quite interesting conclusions. Conjurers are always talking about how easy it is to deceive people. It's all about deception, about distraction, and they will say, that is half the conjurer's art. Once you know how to distract people, then you can do all kinds of stuff. And it's the fact that people, anybody can be distracted, can be deceived, that makes stage magic possible. And I just wondered whether this is something that magicians are actually doing.
Well, but hold on, Robert, because all that might have been true way back at the very beginning, at the earliest phases of how Randi and some of these other folks approached it, but we really can't go there anymore. And from the little quote of yours that I played, I think the part that is just plain out there that we have to address is that no question he makes stuff up, because there is no question he makes stuff up. But the important point for our discussion here is that the people inside of his organization, very few people know that. People are surprised by that. I'll give you an example. This will take a minute, but a couple weeks ago, I published an episode of Skeptico, and I played an audio clip from a very old video done by Stanford Research Institute, where they had done some ESP experiments with Uri Geller. And these were pretty fantastic experiments.
Is this what
Targan put up, right? So I presented these, and I put it out there, and hey, right away I got a response on my website saying, hey, you know what? You really missed the point here, because all this stuff was debunked by Randi in his book Flim Flam, and he debunked all these experiments. Now, what's so fascinating is, we got to get into a little bit of the details here, but one of the main ways that he debunked it is Randi claims that the cameraman for these experiments, a guy named Pressman, has come out and said, hey, these were faked. I didn't shoot all this video, and therefore we can't trust these experiments. Well, someone finally went and investigated whether that claim is true, and it was completely false. Targan put up, said, here, I have an affidavit from Pressman. He says he did record every bit of the video.
Yeah.
And then somebody finally called up Pressman, and he said, that's an outrageous claim. It's totally fabricated. Yes, all that video you see was shot by me.
Yeah.
So, but here's the point. Here's the point in all that. Not that Randi lied, but he did. But when you present that evidence, like I did, to a skeptic, to a Randi supporter, they're impervious to it. They're like, well, that doesn't matter. And one of the things they say is, well, Randy's done so many good things. Randy's done so many good things. Can't we allow him a follow-up here or there? I mean, that just is the beginning of the list of kind of misdeeds of James Randi. So the interesting part from this aspect of where you're handling this is, what is it about our need or the need among this group to so desperately believe? It really is almost like a religious kind of fervor that they get, and a need to, even when you present some really obvious stuff, they just can't go there. They have to stand behind those 6-foot images he has of himself at these conferences. I mean, there are some very cultish aspects to it. Not that there aren't some very cultish aspects to other aspects of our society. I mean, religion is certainly very cultish. But I mean, how do we sort all that out in terms of what's really going on?
Okay, right. Well, as I say, I think it's up to people like us to talk about these things and make them clear. I mean, I used to feel the same way. I sort of feel frustrated and irritated the way that, perfectly good data is just, I mean, the business about JT and, Richard Wiseman and Rupert Sheldrake and the dog JT. I mean, that sort of controversy. I mean, it's terribly, it's really extraordinary how easy it is to debunk something without really knowing very much about it, and just simply to change perceptions. But in a way, I'm sort of becoming more optimistic because, I'm thinking that, I mean, James Randi's coming to the end of his career now, and I'm not sure if we're going to see his like again. And I think he really grew out of a reaction in the late 1970s, early 1980s, a sort of a reaction to perhaps the rather sort of uncritical enthusiasm about science, psychic research that perhaps came out of the 60s and with Uri Geller and so on. And I think these guys, Randi, Paul Kurtz, the founder of Psychop, the CSI now, these guys are, I think they, as I say, they're coming to the end of the careers, and I think they've had a good innings, and I think they've had quite a lot of effect. And I think really it's time for, people like ourselves, as you, as Chris Carter, Michael Prescott, Greg Taylor at the Daily Grail, and other people as well, just quietly making these points. And I think, sooner or later we may achieve some critical mass, and, perhaps some scientists will start to say, well, yes, perhaps we should reconsider these things.
Why? Why would that happen? I just can't. I just don't buy into that, Robert. I think that gets me really worked up. That seems to me dangerous thinking. I mean, go back. You have some great cases in your book. Go back to the turn of the century. Was the evidence any less overwhelming? Were the researchers any less qualified to report on that evidence? I think we go back to the first quote that I mentioned, the gravitational pull of orthodoxy. And I think we make a big mistake if we underestimate the gravitational pull to keep things the way they are. And this idea to just characterize, Randi as just this kind of goofy old man magician who's going to pass away and then everything's going to die down. No way. No. I'm sorry. Perhaps I'm all right. I didn't mean it in quite that way. I think the point I'm making is that, yes, there's been a lot of evidence, but I think if we rely on the science to try and without putting it in some kind of context, then we'll never make any progress. But if we can put it into context, if we can show the psychological factors in the way that the skeptical community behaves, as you've described, if we can put it in the context of the social factors, in terms of what kind of society it would be if psi was acknowledged to be real, then we can start to see, the pressures. We can start to see the outlines of the ideological war going on here. And yes, no, I am optimistic. I think perhaps because nobody's trying to convince the skeptics. I think this is we're making a big mistake if we think that we can, just by talking to them, we can change their minds. That's not going to happen. This is why I say it's politics. When the in the British House of Commons, the Conservatives get up and yell at the Labour on the other side, they're shouting at each other and so on. They're not trying to convince each other. They're trying to influence public opinion, and I think that's what we should be doing. I'm not so sure. I mean, one of the things that I've found from doing Skeptico is that there really are a lot of people in the middle. There really are folks who are in a process of trying to understand this information, and they're trying to come. You had another quote in your book about the vacancy of the New Age thinking, and how it's really intellectually vacant. And I think that we could also say that about a lot of religious thought that gets thrown around. It doesn't have a lot of meat to it for someone who wants to approach the topic intellectually. So I think there's a lot of folks that come into this in the same way that you did. And the skeptical message is very appealing because it buys into something they've already discovered, that, hey, there's a lot of bunk out there that I have to sort through. But I think there's a lot of people that are in that middle ground then who are open to, hey, you know what, this doesn't quite ring true either. And as I alluded to, they're surprised when they find out that Randy does make this stuff up and that Randy is playing a game on them in the same way that religion was trying to play a game on them.
But doesn't that exactly reinforce my point? Because you're banging your drum here, as other people are. We're making these points and we're influencing their opinions. We're helping them to see something that otherwise they might not.
Right. Maybe I was reacting too much to the idea that we shouldn't be arguing with the skeptics, or we shouldn't be. I think we need to have a certain respect for folks who are willing to engage in the first place on these topics. And yeah. I think there's a lot of room to engage with skeptics and to really find a way to talk about these things in a meaningful way. So, this idea that we can't convince a skeptic, I think is not a starting point. It's not a starting point for me, and I just move away from that.
I'm interested in this. I mean, do you actually think you could change a skeptic's mind?
I think everyone who is a quote-unquote believer, I'm a believer, was once a skeptic.
Yes.
So I think it's kind of a tautology. Of course, I don't know if you or I can do it, but I think there's a process that they go through, and I think that, and there's certainly, I don't want to make it like it's there's plenty of believers who are now skeptics too. So, it kind of goes both ways.
No, I was thinking more of, the skeptic spokesman, the psychop types. I mean, they're not going to be persuaded, are they?
Well, we've both encountered that. We've all encountered that, and it's really, at some point you do have to kind of disengage because there's just stuck and stupid, and to carry on with it just puts you in the same mode. One thing I guess that I'd pull back and ask about the James Randi phenomena, if you will. One of the things that it seems to me that he has done, and it's part of his appeal, these ruthless attacks, personal attacks, on scientists who really are caught unsuspecting of it. When I first got into Skeptical, that's one of the things that kind of motivated me, is that I felt like it was really kind of an unfair game. I mean, here's a guy who had brought hardball, dirty trick style politics to science. I mean, if he gets credit for doing that and having that really work, because a lot of us really like that hardball, dirty trick style, even if we don't admit we like it. We like it, and we kind of admire people who can get ahead by any means. But he really brought that to science, and they're really, I think these folks are really caught unsuspecting. I mean, I know, Rupert Sheldrake and Dean Raid and some of the people I first talked to and I highly respect. I think they were really just unprepared for someone who would just have that kind of approach.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's always true. I think parapsychologists are shocked and taken aback when, the skeptics charge, and, they just can't really believe that they make such extraordinary claims and exaggerations and distortions and so on. But, there's an awful lot at stake here. I mean, there's a point here about Randy's prize. I have been trying to investigate a bit and trying to work out what goes on there, and it suffers from a terrible lack of transparency, and you can't really see what's going on. I mean, Randy just says, well, lots of people have applied and nobody's got past the preliminaries. Well, what does that really mean? It is a sort of a barrier, and it's very difficult to get past.
Right. So where do you plan to go with the book? And with your website as well, how is this going to evolve for you? I know it's available.
Yeah, it's all about information. I want to try to, I talked about a lot of the research, and I think that one of the things that really has been missing from this argument is the data itself. I mean, obviously that doesn't apply so much to the modern parapsychology, but certainly, some of the previous psychic research into the sort of ghosts and apparitions and mediums and poltergeists and all these sorts of things. I think needs to be made more easily accessible. So it's very important to me to try and move that along. And I've been talking to the Society for Psychical Research, and they're going to make a lot of their early data, some of the interesting early articles by people like Frederick Myers